Hit record. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our community practice call for the 20th of August. Hard to believe we're this far into the summer. And your mental health team from DPI is standing ready to assist with this presentation, and we're very excited to have Pat Connors from Castle joining us. Pat is the Senior Policy and Practice Consultant there. And just an aside, Pat and I have actually known each other for a little while because we've done a few national projects together when she worked at the Department of Ed in Tennessee. And so I'm really excited to have Pat join us, not just because she's a Castle colleague, but because she's a friend. And I also want to just put a few things out there for some housekeeping before we start. As we've done these before, we do have an ASL interpreter whose video feed will always be attached to the main screen. So if you are having difficulty seeing that or something isn't working, please private message one of the co-hosts so that we can assist you on making sure you can see the interpreter. We may pause periodically in order to switch interpreters as well, so we ask everybody to just be patient with us as we do that. If you want to see the speaker in addition to the interpreters, and if you want to see all of the faces of folks that are joining this, you can put your Zoom in gallery view so that you see more of those video feeds. Also, the slides for this presentation have already been uploaded into the Google folder. We will be putting the link to that Google folder in the chat box so that if you don't have access to that, you can use that link to get to the slides. There is also a document that Pat will be referring to that we will put links to in the chat box when it's time to take you to virtual versions of them. But the roadmap organizer is also uploaded into Google for you into that folder. We'll remind you of that when Pat shares that information. So please feel free to put questions in the chat box. As before, the mental health team is monitoring that chat box. We'll get questions to Pat. We've provided 90 minutes for this so that there's time for discussion and questions. This is an opportunity, you guys, to really ask some great questions about all of this work that Castle's pulled together in this roadmap. There's a lot in it, and so sometimes I think we just get overwhelmed by all of the material that we're given, and that's why we've asked Pat to come and talk about it so you get a better sense of what's going on in this document so that you can find things that you need. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Pat. The link for the folder has just gone into the chat box so that you can locate these slides if you want to follow along. Pat, are you ready to go?
I am ready.
All right, it's all yours, my friend.
Great. Thank you, Beth, and good morning, Wisconsin. I'm calling from the great state of Tennessee, and I'm sure my accent does not give that away, but I'm so happy to be doing this for and with you today. As Beth said, she and I are have been friends for about 6 years, and it's very nice for me to be involved in this project to present it to you. What we know at this time, the name of our roadmap is Reunite, Renew, Thrive. It's the SEL roadmap for returning to school. I've been in education for 35 years, and what I know is, just as Beth referred to, when we feel overwhelmed, then we want to chunk it down. And as an educator, I want to chunk this roadmap down for you because it's a wonderful guide for you to utilize in your planning to transition back to school in whatever form that takes. It could be virtual, blended learning, in person. I know here in my county in Tennessee, we are in blended learning, and so far so good. They have done very well with very low, less than 10 numbers of COVID cases and a population of 30,000 students. So they've really done their homework well. So Castle is really committed at this time to helping schools leverage your current SEL practices in this moment to foster supportive relationships and equitable learning environments where all students, all teachers, all adults feel a sense of belonging, a sense of safety, of agency, and to really harness and utilize their social emotional competencies to heal and thrive as we're in this moment. And honestly, in 35 years, I would never have imagined that we would have been in a moment such as this, with the pandemic, with the economic crisis as a result of the pandemic, with the social unrest, the racial inequities. Uh, we never imagined that this would be all occurring at one moment. And this is a historic moment we're in. So today, my goal is to help you become familiar with the roadmap. I'm going to present a very broad overview. I'm going to hopefully bring the roadmap alive to you, and I'm going to really show you how easy it is to use and that this is not overwhelming. So I'm very excited to show you this. But before I do, let's see here. Okay. Before I do, I want to thank all of our organizations. This was quite a project. We enlisted the help of 40 organizations that participated in the development of this document. So it was quite a feat to take the learnings, which were all very important, from these separate 40 organizations and synthesize, bring a very important perspective and provide key considerations, activities, tools, and resources. And that's what I really love. Again, as an old educator, those tools and resources are what you need, what teachers need at this particular moment. It's not, I know I need to do this, but how do I get that done? And that's what I really like about our toolkit. So our welcoming activity, and most of you know, Castle has 3 signature practices that they follow, that we follow in all our meetings, in our presentations. And those 3 signature practices are a welcoming activity, and then the work or the meat of the meeting, and then an optimistic closure. So we're going to start off today with the welcoming activity. And I want you to look at these boats in this choppy sea. So everyone says, I hear it daily, we're all in this together, that we're in this same storm. But are we? Are we all in the same boat? So when you look at this picture, what does the different sizes of the boat symbolize to you? And how might this image apply to your own work? So the questions again, and I'd like for you to put some responses, invite you to do that in chat, is, are we all in the same boat? What do the different sizes represent or symbolize? And how does this image apply to your own work? So I'm going to give you about a minute to put those in the chat box. And if I'll have someone on our team read those to me, I would appreciate it.
Lance likes the analogy. Shared experiences, different circumstances.
Absolutely.
Many folks have less protective factors than others in the storm.
That's a great one.
Different boat sizes represent resources available to each individual. I love this. People are talking about using it with their students to help them understand other points of view. Different sizes could be different district sizes and resources available. Prestige, position of power, privilege.
I like that bringing in of equity here. Yeah, that's awesome, Lance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really does symbolize to me when you talk about equity, you know, not all kids are coming to the table in the same circumstances. And we really need to be mindful of that.
Different mindsets, different economic resources and social supports.
Absolutely. sometimes on first blush, when I looked at this picture, my eye was drawn to the lone canoer.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes in the midst of all this stuff that seems really overwhelming, you sometimes feel like you're alone in a canoe trying to navigate a really fierce sea.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of somebody was
Each
talking about,
district, yeah, in regards to their plan, yeah, for
Yep.
reopening, lots of different opportunities.
So we're going to move on, but I think someone made the analogy that the destroyer up there was the mothership, which is school, but and how we are strong, we can navigate these waters, and we're flexible. But thank you for all the different. When you look at this, a lot of perspectives come into play, and what this might mean to you may not mean the same, have the same meaning for someone else. But what I want us to realize is that students and families and communities are really wrestling with the impact of the pandemic and the social unrest. And what we need to keep into perspective as we transition back to school is the experience of Tommy. He may not have experienced the COVID and the economic crisis, or that was a product of their parents losing their job, or maybe losing a loved one. But then on the other hand, Sally has one of her relatives has lost their life. Her parents have lost their job. They're being threatened with eviction. There's no money coming in. So kids are going to have different perspectives around this. But what I recommend, and is a good practice, is just to provide them opportunities to be able to talk about in a trusting atmosphere those feelings that they have, and the feelings that you as teachers and educators have around this pandemic. If I can't stress anything, and I know I may be preaching to the choir, but at this time, teacher self-care, administrator self-care is more important than ever. The old analogy of you need to put your face mask, your oxygen mask on first before you can help students is never more true than now, because that's when adults are equipped and are able to process this as within their school or with outside of their school. You're going to be better equipped to be able to meet the social and emotional needs of students, because there has been a lot of anxiety, a lot of trauma, and a lot of loss. But what we know is, even though SEL is not a panacea, it's not the cure-all or the be-all, we know that it's the foundation upon which we should all build our programs, should run our schools, because we know a weak foundation really increases the odds of difficulties. And my analogy is that of a house. You cannot build a house without a foundation. And for SEL, this is the way forward in education. It's the foundation of an equity-focused, social emotional learning education that builds those healthy relationships, that reconnects students and teachers, and helps you to meet the needs of your entire school community. So I'm very passionate about social emotional learning. I think that needs to be integrated and embedded throughout all programs within a district and within a school. So everyone, I hope, knows about CASEL. CASEL is the acronym for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. They've been in business for 25 years. I distinctly remember 25 years ago when I worked in a school district, and I worked in a district for 27 years before I went with the state, finding CASEL, and I just about fell out of my chair, because those were the skills that I had been hoping our teachers and our students would embrace, because they're protective factors and they counteract those risk factors. So when the work of Hawkins and Catalano came across several years ago, many years before Castle, on risk and resiliency, Castle, that foundation for those protective factors are social emotional learning skills. So we've been in business a long time. We have many programs. We're small but mighty. I thought Castle was a huge organization until I got there, and really there's only about 35 to 40 persons that work in the office at Castle. So they do a great amount of work. So the CSI, which Wisconsin is a part of, and that's how I met Beth, is the Collaborating States Initiative. And it's really a community of practice. Right now we have 40 states and growing that are involved in this community of practice. And the goal is to encourage districts and schools to engage in equity-focused systemic SEL. So it's only been in existence since 2016. I was lucky in Tennessee to be one of the first states involved, and it's just amazing. And that's what I do at Castle now. I am a coach with states, and I love the work we're doing. This is our framework, and I won't belabor that. If you're familiar with Castle, there are 5 core competencies, and there is a systemic approach. So briefly, at the heart of this circle are the 4 core competencies. And you see on the outside, this should be integrated systemically through classrooms, schools, homes and communities, in curriculum and instruction, practices, policies, and in partnerships. These are the social and emotional competencies that you need now, more than ever. It's so important to have these skills at the ready for us and for students as well. So you see self-awareness, and I'm just going to lift up a couple that I think are extremely important right now, is to recognize how you're feeling and why, and to realize how your emotions impact the things I do, say, and write. Many years ago, I stumbled across, pleasantly, the work of Dr. Glazer with the Think, Feel, Do cycle, and it was an epiphany for me that my thoughts cause my feelings, cause my actions. So to realize how your emotions, your thoughts really drive your behavior. And the other is self-management. How can we teach kids to recognize and regulate their emotions? How we can help them to stop and think before posting on social media, and how they can set goals for themselves. And then social awareness, developing empathy. That's why I think class circles, if you do those in your classroom, are extremely important, because again, if my experience is not like the person next to me, I need to hear their perspective. I need to be aware. So with that, I develop empathy because not everybody, again, is in the same boat. Relationship skills. As you see, the first couple of weeks in this roadmap, the #1 recommendation is to reconnect with not only peers, but students and families. So your fellow colleagues, your administrators, it's all about, or should be about, relationships these first 2 weeks. And that can be done not only in person, which is optimal, of course, but it can be done virtually. And then the last one is responsible decision-making. How am I going to teach students to self-advocate and to manage those priorities, to take care of themselves, for me to take care of myself? So these are important skills now more than ever. So let's talk a little bit about the roadmap. It's a new resource, as you see. It was developed for schools at any stage of SEL implementation. And what I've learned in my work in the department here previously in Tennessee is that schools and districts are all at different levels of implementation with regard to social emotional learning. But this guide helps you to take where you are and to build upon those existing efforts. And it's going to support you to transition back to school in whatever form that takes. And I think it's so important that you reflect about last year and the lessons learned there, and to act upon what you can do that's different to leverage this moment. So I'm going to click on this link, and I believe you have it in your, or should have it in the chat box. This is the link to the guide, the roadmap, and I call this the Cliff Notes version. So this is extremely helpful. At this link, you can find and download a copy of the roadmap. You can also, which is a new feature, purchase a printed copy. If you're like me, I have to have something physical in my hand. It tells you about the roadmap. It tells you how to use the roadmap. And you'll see the link here, and we'll refer to this later, as how to download this organizer that I think is an extremely helpful tool. But what I love on this website is the tool index. So we have 4 critical practices, which we'll go into further when we go into the roadmap. There are 4 critical practices in the roadmap. So all the tools that you will find for that critical practice are here. For example, I'm going to click on one, responsive circles for COVID. You, of course, bring up the International Institute, IIRP, and it gives you tips on how to do those practices, those circle activities in response to COVID. But it doesn't just have to be about COVID. It could also be about racial injustice, or just an issue you might be having in the school or in the community or in your classroom. So I really appreciate having these available for us. And so when you go down and click on all of those, you'll see all the tools pop up. It's a great resource for us. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. And so when we look at this, the very first activity that we find, and if you don't mind putting the organizer, that link, into the chat box, that would be great. One of the activities that we encourage you to do as a team, and in Critical Practice 1.4, we also recommend that schools develop a transition team who will be doing the major lift for getting schools reopened, but also a coalition of broader stakeholders such as community partners, community agencies that provide services in your building, families, students. But in your initial core team, this activity is a great way to process what you're currently experiencing. And so I'm going to invite you in just a moment to get into a breakout room. But what I would like to do is for you just to read over these 5 challenges you are facing at the moment. And I invite you to think about a 6th one, and that would be decision fatigue. I know many of you are overwhelmed by the amount and sheer volume of decisions that you have to make right now. So if you will focus on 1, maybe 2, what you're feeling, what challenge, I'm going to put you into a breakout room for about 5 minutes and have you in that room really kind of talk about what you're experiencing at this moment, and just kind of vent or air your challenge that you're having right now. So if I could ask that my breakout person send folks to a breakout room, and are there any questions about this activity before we begin it? Okay, well, let's go to a breakout room and have you talk about your challenge.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Morning, everyone.
Hi.
Anyone feel like sharing? Start us off.
I think the one that stuck out to me was a sense of urgency and complexity. And I like to be a problem solver, and there's certainly a sense of urgency surrounding so many decisions. But I have to keep reminding myself that the knee jerk isn't going to be the best solution. And so consideration of the complexity of the problem is going to be a way better route to take.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're feeling that too. It's just like you want to like make decisions and get communication out, and then communication goes out and things change, and so then that feels overwhelming. I think those two are pretty linked for me as far as how to get people what they need, but also to not lose engagement as well as we're trying to get this school year started.
Mhm.
They seem to kind of snowball all into each other then, you know. Emily, when you said get information out, I've been trying to get information to people so they don't feel unease, and so that there is more of a team feeling. But then when it changes, that's overwhelming again. And you know,
Right.
it's the cycle
For
of,
sure.
oh my gosh, I'm trying to be a team player, but now I'm overwhelmed because they gave me the wrong information.
I know. Well, and like our district too is like doing so much communication with families that important things are getting lost. And so then there has to be more communication about you missed this link, you need to do this. And so it's like a big balance of like, how do you meet people's needs as far as communication goes, to not overwhelm them, to get the important stuff, but also to not miss important stuff. Like it's just kind of this huge balancing act that we're figuring out.
For
I
sure.
feel that as a parent of a second grader, because I can't get through my work emails, and then at night I'm looking through my personal emails and have all these different ones from the school district and trying to figure that out. And I guess a 4K student as well who's starting virtually. But yeah, I'm in the overwhelmed state for sure. And I had taken some time off to parent my three young children, and I never got through those emails. And so they just, that just piles on top. So I'm getting to I'm keeping up with today's, but if somebody emailed me 2 months ago, I think I'm just gonna delete those ones at this point, because I can't even, I usually have my inbox like very small, and to have this giant inbox right now is very anxiety provoking for me.
Yeah. I know.
And then like literally every time we turn around on my team, we get a new project, and it's really great. We got some really nice federal money, and we're going to do some creating supports and resources for schools. But I mean, it's things like literally, okay, in 3 days, tell us who your partner is, have your contract started, update us on the work every week. There's a lot, which I know you guys are dealing with too.
Yeah, it's that triaging. When I look back at the slide here, it says the sense of urgency can hijack your ability to think critically, and that's so true. You know, you get like down this rabbit hole and you're like, wait, that is not what is the most important right now. I just got totally hijacked by, I can't deal with my inbox.
Right.
So
right.
Very difficult, Julie. I hear ya.
And then sometimes my brain just shuts down. So then I have all this to do, and I spend 10 minutes looking out the window at the flowers. It's like,
yeah, you got to do that. Good thing you got some flowers out there.
Right?
Yeah.
Thank goodness it's like summer and not back in March when we were in the doldrums of, disgusting weather and locked in. And unfortunately, that's going to happen again in Wisconsin. But
I know, I'm worried about the winter coming up, right?
Yeah, I refused to work in my basement for these like first few weeks of summer, because that's where I was in the spring. And I'm like, I am not locking myself where there's no windows.
Yeah, I know. I had to get out of my basement too.
Yeah. I tried to, in the spring, I tried to do as many meetings, including this one I was trying to do, but I'm not out the door yet. But to put headphones in and do a walk during it, like when you don't need to be like typing or something during a meeting. to just get that physical.
Yeah.
I tried to do that a couple weeks ago when I was camping, and then a storm came and tried to blow my camper away. And then
Oh
I had my video off and everything, and then somebody like said, "Oh, Alyssa, did you have something else that you could add to this?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness, no, I can't."
Oh no.
I'm
It
trying to
caught
hold
me
my
at a bad
awning
time.
up. Right. Yeah. So I was totally busted for multitasking. Yikes.
Oh, that's great you got out camping though. Jeez.
I know. I'm going to add it to my embarrassing Zoom meeting, fiascos.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been some good ones for sure.
Absolutely. Nice chatting with you, lady.
Does not matter. The roadmap, again, the 4 SEL critical practices, and each one of those practices have 3 to 5 user-friendly activities that you can choose. And each activities are guided through some essential questions that kind of get you thinking about and reflecting about, are you doing this? How can we do this? And then those action steps. And in Tennessee, I was over school safety as well. And so I always relate this to a crisis response plan where you have before, during, and after. And we use the terms to prepare, what you should do before, implement is the during, and sustain is the after. What do you need to continue this work? And then again, I've already showed you those tools. And so my recommendation to you is to really start with 1 or 2 critical practices. Don't do the whole roadmap. And I'm going to show you an organizer that will help you find what critical practice and activity really resonates with you, to focus on that activity. And from that activity, you can prepare, implement, and sustain. So got to chunk this work down because it is overwhelming, but it is doable. So again, the roadmap alone is not helpful if you're doing it by yourself, but that it should be part of a team process. And we recommend that you use the organizer, which we're going to pull up you can already go ahead and pull that up if you'd like to. And we're going to ask you to rank those priorities, and I'm going to show you that. And again, those prioritized sections, divide those up among your team. You're going to make notes about what your action steps may be. And then again, those tools that you saw previously are very simple, very user-friendly. When we vetted these through the eyes of a school, a teacher. So we wanted to make sure that they're very user-friendly. So let's take a little peek at the organizer. So how am I going to review and look at this roadmap? So the organizer tool will help you do that. It's very user-friendly. So what we ask you to do, again, is as you're reading, and the organizer has all the critical practices, all the activities, as you're just doing a quick read through, because there's a definition for each of those practices and each of those activities, which one is a priority for you? So rate those from a 1, which is the most immediate, to a 3. This can come later. This is not important in this moment. And then when you look at the before, during, and after, the prepare, so what am I going to do now to prepare for 2021? What needs to happen now? How am I going to implement this? What am I going to do the first 2 to 3 weeks, the first month of school? And then the sustainability. How am I going to keep this practice going throughout the school year? And I can just speak for myself as being an educator. I know when a new initiative rolls out or a new tool or whatever, I get fired up about it and I have great intentions. But then as the year progresses and other things happen, those good intentions kind of take a stiff nosedive because other priorities come forward. So that's why I'm really encouraging folks who are looking and using the roadmap, just pick 2. What are 2 activities that you know you can do now and that you can sustain throughout the year? You don't have to do all of these. So let's kind of take a deeper look at what these practices are. I know you can read. But let me just see if I can move my, take time. The first one is to take time to cultivate and deepen relationships. If you're looking at our CASTLE's theory of action for schools, districts, and states, number one is foundational support. So critical practice one is, what is the foundation that we need to lay before school and during the first few weeks? And that is about relationships and rebuilding partnerships and planning for SEL. That's the foundation. And then the next is about teachers. How do we support teachers? So how can we design opportunities where adults can connect and heal and build their capacity to support students? And this goes into a lot of teacher self-care and also access to mental health supports. The third is about students, creating those safe, supportive, and equitable learning environments that really support all students. And I'll just have to say, in my opinion, I think social emotional skills are the great equalizer. They're good for all kids, all adults. They are from birth, from cradle to the grave, as we say in the South. These are skills that are good for everyone. SEL skills know no socioeconomic boundaries or race or ethnicity or gender. They're good for all adults, all students, all children. And the last is using data as an opportunity to share power, relationships, and continuously improve. Involve students, families, and your staff and teachers in looking at the data that supports the work that you're doing, because we're all data driven. If in my previous life in a district, if you couldn't show that it worked, you just didn't do it. So I think that's how we all focus now. So let's take a quick look, and I think I can not this one, but the next one. We're going to do some polling. So these are the critical practice one and those activities that you can do. And there's 4 within this critical practice. Foster new relationships, use two-way communication. And that is a real struggle right now. Well, you know, a lot of folks over the summer could not find students. So how can we rethink our communication strategies? The examine impact of SEL efforts. What are you doing or have you done in the past? And how can you improve on that and prioritize that through a data-centered lens? And then again, I've already talked about this. How can you build a coalition, a team that will help you? This you cannot do alone. When you implement and integrate SEL, this should not be another add-on to a teacher's busy schedule. It should be systematically integrated within the school culture, the classroom culture, the community culture. So this is critical practice 1. And I'm going to switch to 2, and I think that's what my poll is, if I'm not mistaken. Critical practice 2 is where we're going to design opportunities where adults can connect. So you see the 4 critical activities, and I'm just going to give you a moment to read over those, and then we're going to start a poll for you to identify which one of these 4 activities would you prioritize as number 1. Okay, I'm going to launch the poll. And give you about, well, I'll judge by the response. Okay, I think we've reached a plateau in our polling, so I'm going to end that, and I'm going to share the results of that poll. So the number one priority, which makes my heart happy, is to allowing space for those connections and healing among adults. It's just as important as it is with our students. Great. And thinking about ways to do that within your current structure of your school is also important. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And the next one, which I'm also going to have this as a polling question, is number 3, which focuses on students, is how are you going to create those safe and supportive and equitable learning environments that promote all students' social emotional development? There are 5 activities, and so I'm going to invite you to read those, and then we're going to ask how or which one you would like to prioritize in this moment. Okay, launch the poll, and you'll have about 45 seconds to enter. Okay, I'm going to end the polling, and I'm going to share the results. So as you see, again, our number one priority, again, relationships, as well it should be. And let me just say this, when we've done this, when I've done this presentation, what you chose as the most immediate priority have been the same priorities other folks around the nation have also selected. So these are uppermost in the minds of folks as they start school back. And I'm going to get out of this. And so our last one is about using that data as an opportunity to share power. Any opportunity we can get to share our data with students and families is extremely important. And one piece of whatever your data is, if you do a school climate survey, what I used to do in my district with ours is I would give it to the students at each of those schools and let them analyze it and make a presentation to the teachers. They loved it. So how can we involve student voice in that? How can we support our educators in providing opportunities for reflection on our instruction? And how are we going to partner with families and community members? So how can we use our data in those 3 ways are extremely important. So what I'd like to do is pause for a moment and ask my colleagues who are in the chat box monitors if there are any questions at this time you might have. We're going now to a deeper dive. So are there any thoughts or questions that need to be shared at this time?
Just the fact that we had some folks who were not able to vote in the poll, Pat. I think that's probably more of a function of Zoom than anything that you've done, and there are no questions at this point.
Okay, great. And I'm sorry about that. Maybe I didn't leave it up long enough as well. So great. Thank you so much. So we're going to take a deeper dive into one of these. So what does it look like? And so we're going to select Critical Practice 3, and the activity is 3.2. So how are we going to weave in opportunities for students to develop, practice, and reflect upon social emotional competencies throughout the day? And so if you look at, again, these are all the sections. Every activity it has these sections within it. So what is the essential question for this one? So how are we going to support teachers in providing those opportunities for students to reflect? And across my life in education, that has been a concern many teachers have voiced. How can we be given and allowed to take the time to focus intentionally on the opportunities for students to reflect and process? So being intentional and setting aside time for SEL is a concern. And how are we doing that in our schools? And prepare. Let's look at our current SEL programs or curriculum. Did it work? Do they not work before the pandemic? And really to look at this through an equity focus. And I want to point out something here. You'll see in parentheses, this document also crosswalks it with the other activities. And so another activity within the document that would be helpful is also 1.3. And so how are we going to implement this? How are we going to maintain those opportunities for students to connect with their peers, especially during these less structured times, especially during social distancing? Many of us are not allowed to have students even be near each other during these times. And what about virtual lunch buddies? There are ways we can do that. So really rethinking how we might replicate that in a virtual setting. And what I love about the tools that we provided, all these tools can be adapted to a virtual setting, especially like a learning log to look at how their learnings are for students to keep a learning log. And then how are we going to sustain this throughout the year? And that is really a focus on relationship building with and among students. Is just really an ongoing process. And again, those, let me see, a sample teaching activity. Let me see if I can brave this world. It works. So these are sample teaching activities that CASEL has as a tool. And so I'm just going to show you briefly what's great activities, strategies for self-awareness, all the core competencies, self-management. So this, yet again, is a great user-friendly tool that teachers can use. So as we look at this, I want us to turn to page 33. And what I would like for us to do in the chat box is really, I think this is a Padlet question, excuse me. Yes, this is a Padlet question. So if folks will put in the chat box the Padlet link. All right. I'd like for you to answer the question on the Padlet. And the question is, what opportunities do we provide teachers to learn and practice and receive support? So if you don't mind clicking on the Padlet, and I'm in there as well, you'll see down in the bottom right-hand corner across, and when you click on it, you can type in there. So I invite you to type in there what your strategies are. How are you going to allow teachers the time to do this? Initial focus on teacher well-being, excellent. Journaling prompts, very important. We have a lot of those in our tools. Support being just being there for them. online support groups. I love that. Early SAP groups. Mental health resources for staff, extremely important. Yeah, and this is a good point someone brought up about weaving it into instruction. There are 10 instructional practices that promote social emotional learning in the classroom. It comes from great teachers and leaders. If you wanted to Google that, that was also something I highlighted in Tennessee because teachers don't have time, so let's show them how to do it as they're doing their instruction. So I also have a resource document with See It in Action videos that I'll be happy to share. PLC discussions, love that. Morning meetings. They're the two most effective strategies to promote social emotional learning, according to Dr. David Osher with American Institute of Research, are meetings, class meetings, and cooperative learning groups. It builds agency within students in both of those strategies. Student check-ins. You can still do check-in, check-out online. Yes, and giving teachers permission. It's okay, and that comes from the top-down leadership. Absolutely. So I'm gonna, if you will, click out of the Padlet, and let's see. Okay, let me go back to presenter view. So that was our essential question, and your responses were spot on with that. And so let's look at the prepare and implement sections. And I want you to look at this because, yet again, chock full of hyperlinked resources that you can utilize as you prepare, what you should do before, as you're implementing. And I'm just going to click on one just to show you. These are 5 tips for supporting students socially and emotionally during distance learning. Great tool. And again, talks about some of the things you'd put in there. Regular check-ins, family engagement. So very important tool. The next, oh, I need to click out of that, sorry. And then on page 35, again, all those tools that we've seen before. At the end of each activity are the tools that will support that activity. So how are we going to sustain these critical practices? So for each broad critical practice, 1, 2, 3, 4, at the end is a sustain tool or the activities to sustain that. And on this page, it's page 43. So how are we going to sustain that? Okay. I'm going to go, should I go back to the question? Oh, let me go back on that. So I'm going to pause a moment and ask if there are any questions around what we've presented so far. And what I would like to do is get your thoughts on how user-friendly or how practical this guide can be to support you in reopening schools. So if you don't mind putting that in the chat box, I would love to hear your thoughts around that.
Pat, also, you had mentioned you'd be willing to share the video resource that you have created on showing how teachers are doing SEL.
Yes.
We have a lot of people that would like that, so.
I have several. If you don't mind, Beth, I'm going to send you our Tennessee document on the 10 instructional practices and how, and in each one of those is a link to video, an elementary and a secondary video of See It in Action for that.
Okay.
So I'll share that with you and you can choose which ones you'd like to see. I highly recommend 2. One is in teacher language, where a young man integrates academics into his morning meeting. He compares rock formations to emotions. So very cool.
Yeah, and we'll send that out through the listserv then once we get it from you.
Great. I love to share it. These videos are so phenomenal. I want as many eyes on them as we can get. Any questions or thoughts that I can respond to?
It was just
Okay.
a clarification about David Osher. I put that in the chat.
Okay.
And then Joanne suggested responsive classrooms for morning meetings. It's a curricular program to
Yes.
guide through morning meetings. It's an evidence-based program, in fact.
Yes, it is. I love responsive classroom. Thank you for putting that in there. Absolutely. Okay. So we have yet another Padlet, I believe, for this. So as a leader in your school, and teachers and supervisors and program directors, we're all leaders in this. So again, I want you to put in here how you're going to use the SEL roadmap that is going to allow you to promote that equity-focused SEL. And what do you think you should communicate from this? What are the key messages? And it may take a deeper dive into the material or the roadmap to be clear about that. And then the other one is, how can we support you, or how can the DPI continue to support you in your efforts to reopen your schools? So if we'll put the Padlet link in the chat box, let's see. There we go.
It's there.
Great. Relentlessly talking the talk, walking the walk. Absolutely. Actions speak louder than words. Absolutely love that. Explaining the why, very important. Yeah, it's almost like you're doing a sales job in school sometimes about why you need to do this. Yeah, absolutely. And so you bring up a real good point about the first 2 weeks of school. There's going to be a Castle Cares webinar, not this week, but, well, this week is an important one as well. But the next week is from Dr. Bruce Perry from the National Child Trauma Academy. I think it's what I don't know the name of his group, but Dr. Perry has worked all over the country. He's the premier psychiatrist to work with trauma from Waco, Sandy Hook, and he's going to really, his message is going to be, you in education, we're not going to be able to spend all the first 2 weeks hammering on academics, because it's not going to happen. What we need to do, again, is lay that foundation to really process where we are and to help kids process where they are, and then go into academics. And he will say as well, because I've heard him say it before, that you will not gain the first semester, make up for those gains that those kids have lost the second semester, especially those who weren't present at all. So it's a very challenging time. I love that it's not, this is not an extra thing. This is how we do business in school every day. Yep, absolutely. Great. Continuing this work. Yeah, let's not take a nosedive. Now more than ever, social emotional learning is so important. Great comments. Thank you so much. And I will archive these, and I'll be happy to send those to you, Beth.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And Greg put the link to the Castle Cares website, or the webinars, in the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
We have shared that through the listserv, but they are offering free webinars And the Bruce Perry one will be through that Castle Care. So if you're interested in that, you can go to the link.
Okay, great. So in closing today, I'd have some thoughts that I would like to share with you as we seek to reunite, excuse me, and renew our school communities. It is more important now than ever, not just students, but adults, social emotional development combined with academic. There should not be a delineation between those. They should be hand in hand. And to realize that not everyone has been impacted by these challenges equally, and to realize that. And then to invite school leaders to create new types of learning. This is an opportunity to really look at what we've done in the past, imagine or maybe reimagine how it might be different now, and how we can continue to adapt those systems of support. And I hope that the SEL roadmap can support you in your planning for transition back to school in whatever form that takes. So I would like to thank you today for your commitment to SEL and to the critically important work that we have ahead of us, all of us. And to take care of yourself, you've got to put your oxygen mask on first. So Beth, I will turn it back over to you.
So just one thing, because this was a quick walk through the guide. If you've been taking a look at it, you'll see that it's got a lot of information in there. And I want you to know that there are, one of the things that's really well done in here too, among many, is that the list of resources are pulled out and given to you at the end of the sections. And I'm also very pleased to note that the Compassion Resilience Toolkit that we've been doing here in Wisconsin is in the document. So when you're going through there, I know that this is a group, having worked with you for months now, that really wants to get your hands on resources. The guide helps you figure out where to target, what sorts of things that you want to focus on, and then you can find the resources to do that below. I am sharing a link for you. We've had a lot of questions, and I'm making a distinction between screening. We've had some webinars the last month that actually talked about specific behavioral health, mental health screening. But some people have been also looking for resources on how to assess where staff are at and what needs are, and maybe where to target the SEL instruction. And so we went through and curated from this document, the roadmap, as well as some other documents that people have shared on reopening schools, to come up with a list of some resources you might want to use for adult or student surveys. That's been linked in the chat box for you to take a look at.
Right.
So from here, I'd like to open this up to questions. This is your opportunity to ask Pat some questions about the roadmap or resources. I think you've been able to see right away that she is a wealth of resources. And just let's open it up, and the team is going to take a look, follow the chat box. While we're waiting, Pat, I will just throw some questions out here because there's always a delay with people typing. When you think about all of the different resources in there, do you have a favorite?
Gosh, no. I mean, they're all important, especially I think what are particularly important now are those that are for distance learning.
Mm-hmm.
And how you can implement social emotional learning in a virtual environment. You know, some people are hesitant to do that, but those same practices with morning meetings, with check-ins, with groups can be done through a virtual setting. Some people are not real comfortable. Some teachers are not very comfortable with doing those kinds of practices anyway in the classroom. But when you transition those to a virtual setting, they become even more uncomfortable with that. Some students may be uncomfortable, but I tell you, when I've met with students online, they're very talkative. So I think those are most important at this moment. But again, those instructional practices, how we can embed those in our practices are, to me, is how we sustain the work. And in Tennessee, we tied this to our team evaluation. So if a teacher was doing this particular instructional practice, then she would possibly get a higher score, because all ours were performance-based, is a performance-based evaluation. So those are, to me, very important.
There was
Doing formally trained. I think I most definitely think you need to provide some sort of learning opportunities, professional learning opportunities. And I can send Beth this link and she can put it in here. But American Institute of Research, and Beth, do you have SEL online modules? Uh-oh.
Sorry, yes, and it launched, and so I had to turn off the the I had to mute myself so you didn't start hearing the video. But we do have an online module to introduce SEL.
Great.
And I just linked it in the chat.
Yeah, I knew you probably did. I would start out there as well. There is another one. Beth, is this something you partnered with Nick to develop?
Yeah, and we started with one of the modules from the state of Washington.
Yes.
So this is the initial module, and then we've been doing the implementation team training using the school guide, and we're working on prioritizing getting that all virtual so that teams can go through that together. And then it includes some resources. The other thing too, Lance, is that there are on the website, there are webinars that staff can take a look at regarding different types of things with SEL. But that module is just the first introductory one. And then we do offer a TOT, which we will be doing virtually, to train your own staff in the foundational practices, the foundational knowledge of SEL.
Great. Those are great resources that your team at DPI has developed. Awesome.
Greg also put the webpage to the expertise building, so that includes links to articles and things if you want to start engaging staff in professional learning communities or book studies, that can help build that expertise.
And so let me make a suggestion about this introductory module. We have paraprofessionals in our school buildings that need some staff development as well. And this introductory model, if this is something you're integrating throughout your school, they need to be aware of it as well. So I would utilize that with all your support staff. And what's it, an hour? How long is it, Beth?
About an hour, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And it does have a function to get a certificate at completion, but that was generally done by human beings and not, it wasn't something that was built into the actual system sometimes. And so if you do need that and you have trouble, please make sure that you email us and we can try to get you that certificate of completion.
Great.
Any other questions, or what are some things that you guys are looking for? What are some resources that you want? I feel like everybody's just sort of wallowing in the feelings of stuff right now and the overwhelm, but if you can pinpoint a resource or something that you would like. Yeah, right, Sarah, everything is overwhelming right now.
Yeah. Yeah, we got to chunk it down into bite-sized pieces, divide and conquer. That's all we can do.
And it sounds like most people are looking at focusing on the relationship building.
Yes.
And so, just go right to that part of the guide. Just go right there and look at what are the resources, what are the examples of how to do that virtually, and make it easy on yourself by taking one step.
Yes.
Yep. Any suggestions for a lighter read for a book study, not something too deep as staff are feeling overwhelmed? Alyssa, on that website, you will find short articles. In fact, most of them aren't books because we recognize for that very reason that there may just not be time to go into books. And there are some articles from PSU, Pennsylvania State University, and I think Rand Corporation around SEL in an elementary level, SEL at a middle school, SEL at a high school, early childhood, just some different topics on SEL, and they're short.
Yeah, and also I'm going to put it, the Castle website has a lot of great articles as well that you can utilize in that. And again, the best advice I ever got from my commissioner was, if it's longer than 5 pages, they're not going to read it. So, and that is so true, especially at this time. So short, succinct articles are wonderful. And Ed Week also has a number of those as well.
So I can share my screen here a minute just because there was a question about where this was. Greg put into the chat box the Build Your SEL Expertise link, and it will take you to this page. This is where you find the Access the Training module. And then each of these drop downs includes articles, toolkits, things to discuss to build your expertise in those areas. And when I was referencing, so there's stuff on SEL and equity from the Aspen Institute, grade band specific, and reading, and then also in here are reading lists for kids. So for those of you that are looking for, this is a great activity that could be done virtually as well, where the literature that's chosen could also be integrated with the SEL skills that you're trying to teach. So you will find all of that on this portion of the website. And just so you know, because many of you may not be familiar, off to the left here are all kinds of sub-pages for SEL, and also additional training ones are the webinars that you will find that we've been doing examples of practice webinars, and last year's webinars are here as well. So there's all kinds of different ways to build your own expertise and help your staff do that as well.
Great. That's a great resource, Beth. Awesome. And doing, when we started, we've had a character ed law on our books for like 8 years. And it was done through reading and through history. So that's same with SEL. Is reading. One school in Nashville has what they call the nest time, and that's where they've chosen a book, especially with an equity focus, and they read it in the group and process their emotions and feelings about it. And that's a way to help also underpin and bring forth a time to practice your SEL skills.
And for people at the high school level looking for social studies and history sorts of resources, Facing History and Ourselves is a great free resource for teachers to integrate historical events and things with SEL and social justice.
Yes.
Greg added something on the connections with SEL and ACP in Wisconsin. We have the academic and career plan requirement, and many of the folks on here are very actively engaged in that work. Any other questions, things that you'd like, what you're looking for?
And I think the most challenging thing, Beth, is taking time, devoting time to sifting through these resources. And in acknowledgement of that, that's why we didn't want to overwhelm people in our roadmap. So we put down 5, no more than 5, 3 to 5 resources. And then if we had any additional ones, we put those on the website as well. We don't want you to be overwhelmed by this, because it is overwhelming.
And I think that's one of the ways that our team at DPI can help by narrowing some of that down, curating lists, kind of pulling different resources together so that it's easier for you to find what you need. The roadmap is set up so you can go right to the area that you want to prioritize, and that's really, really helpful. But if you're finding that you're trying to locate specific kinds of resources, another one that Castle has and we've shared before is that a number of program publishers have free resources available for online SEL, and Castle curated that list, and you can just see all the places where you can access free SEL resources for online. And I'm not sure I have access to that very quickly, but we have shared it and we can share it again. So we aren't going to keep people for more time unless there's any more questions. One thing we'd like to share with you is that knowing that there's so much going on, questions come up, sometimes you just need to get on someone's radar to ask a question. The off weeks from these community of practice webinars through September, we're going to be offering office hours where some of the team, the mental health team, will be available to answer questions. There's no content that's planned. It's just us there to take questions and help you process some things. If you'd like to join us, we'll send some things out through the listservs for that. And so next week will be the first office hour, followed the week after by the next community of practice, which we will be sending some information out to you about shortly. And just as the last call for questions. Just one final thing to reiterate what Pat said then for me. It really stuck with me when she said, you need to put your own mask on first. We just need to be good to ourselves, kind to ourselves, and sometimes just getting through the day is good enough. So do what you do what you do. You're all doing well. I'm always constantly amazed by the passion of educators and the love they have for students. And it's not always, you're not always hearing that, I'm afraid. So you are appreciated and your students are well taken care of. You're doing great work.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank
We
you.
will see you all in a couple weeks in the community practice. Love to chat with some of you next week. And you know how to reach the members of the team, so feel free to do that. If you are not currently on the listserv and you would like to be because somebody shared this link with you, please send us an email and we'll get you on the listserv.
Thank you, Beth.